Don't forget to introduce yourself. If you want to, I think it'd be great. It's up to you, though.
Hello, I am Alex Safel. I am the first speaker of the affirmative side. So, all public colleges and universities should adopt COVID-19 vaccine mandates. Studies from the CDC show that people with vaccines are 5 times less likely to spread COVID than others and 10 times less likely to be hospitalized. Colleges everywhere should have the safety for their students to be the most important thing, and the vaccine mandate is just another step to better protect their students and their communities. The COVID-19 vaccine isn't just some random liquid being shot into millions of people's bodies. It is an FDA-approved vaccine that is made up of many other various vaccines that some people already have. According to the University of Missouri, the process that created the COVID-19 vaccine is called a viral vector vaccine, which is used to modify versions of 2 different viruses. The research for this technique dates back all the way to 1790 when it was used for gene therapy and cancer treatment, and the viral vaccine technology is used in cases like Ebola, influenza, and HIV. This is from the University of Missouri's Healthcare 2021. It is important to mandate the vaccine so that colleges can return to normal campus and atmosphere. But some wonder how long and how far do we have until things are normal again. There needs to be herd immunity, and studies show from the CDC that age groups between 18 and 24 have much lower vaccine rates than people of the ages between 35 and 39. With shockingly low rates of only 34% of these young adults fully vaccinated, there is a huge gap between the vaccination rates of younger people compared to older people, which makes sense because older people are affected by COVID-19 and have a higher hospitalization rate. Furthermore, people between those ages that go to college have very low vaccine rates, and this is why it's important to have a vaccine mandate to reach herd immunity faster and more efficient. Many colleges in the United States require their students to get their meningitis B vaccine before arriving to campus, and there have not been any issues with requiring a vaccine for students' health and welfare until 2021. The COVID vaccine mandate is heavily politicized to the point in which it triggered the first legal dispute in the nation over college vaccine mandates. In fact, the University of Indiana, which is a red state, requires their students to have their vaccination prior to enrolling in the institution. And 8 students filed a case against the school of Indiana. The claim is that all 8 cases of the school was forcing them to get the vaccine, but when brought to a federal judge the following month, their arguments were all rejected because students have the choice to pick which college they attend, and exemptions that will accommodate students' religious beliefs and medical conflicts. Many are hesitant to get the vaccine because they are worried about long-term side effects, or if there are any side effects. Well, in the study of Missouri's University Health and Welfare, it says that the side effects from COVID-19 showed up in the first 2 weeks to first 2 months, and the side effects occurring in only a handful of 1.74 million of Americans that received the J&J vaccine. In conclusion, college students have significantly lower vaccine rates compared to the rest of the population, but with the vaccine mandate, it can help protect the campus as well as the community. In addition, the federal court in the state of Indiana has made the ruling that it does not violate your constitutional right because there are accommodations to those who need it to protect their religious exemptions and medical exemptions. Thank you.
All right, join me in thanking our affirmative speaker. And we turn it over to the negative.
Hello, my name is Rachel Frigier, and I will be representing the negative. Joseph Borrell said, COVID-19 will reshape our world. We don't yet know when the crisis will end, but we will be sure by the time it does, our world will look very different. How different will depend on the choices we make today. We oppose the resolution, all public colleges and universities should adopt COVID-19 vaccine mandates for three main reasons: combating the perpetuation of settler futurity, institutional racism, religious exemptions, and people with autoimmune diseases. First is combating the perpetuation of settler futurity and institutional racism. They fail to recognize and combat institutional racism and punish those who are unable to overcome the oppressive system. The story begins with Nurdin et al., who tells the story of healthcare's historical relationship with structural violence. Since the dawn of modern healthcare, the subjugation of people of color was the foundation of many medical discoveries, from Tuskegee to forced silent sterilization of Black and Indigenous women, to the exploitation and marginalization. The healthcare system has profited from the damage of people of color. This becomes even more problematic when we look at Anderson 2021. Anderson explains that Black and Indigenous folks are distrusting of public health measures because they have always been to the detriment of Black and Indigenous communities. The COVID vaccination mandate forces these people with valid concerns to subject themselves to potential harm in the name of public good, and obfuscates their autonomy. Likewise, we can look to Howell 2014, who explains how the use of public health measures as a mean for utilitarian public good perpetuates settler control over indigenous bodies for scientific discovery. The same distrust can be found in regards to vaccine mandates. When a Native person doesn't get the vaccine because of historical trust and lack of accessibility, they are punished. Such punishment perpetuates the same cycle of control in Indigenous Black communities that we've seen in the past. You cannot prioritize the greater good or the public's health when the public is a settler state benefiting from the exploitation of disenfranchised groups. Next is religious exemption. The affirmative allows the religious exemption, which is problematic for a number of reasons. First, we can look to the AAFP in 2018 that states that urban areas have seen a dramatic increase in the number of non-medical exemptions, which have caused a decrease in COVID vaccination efficacy. Also, NBC highlights in 2021 that the religious aspect of exemptions has become increasingly more common despite the lack of actual involvement in said religions. Abuse of these exemptions, typically in Anglo-centric faiths, creates a loophole around the mandates, making them wholly ineffective. Lastly, the people with autoimmune disease. The CDC in 2021 noted that in immunocompromised persons were at increased risk for complications when taking the vaccine, specifically noting a 63% effect on these folks versus a relatively low effect on non-compromised individuals. Finally, we look to Moeller 21, who states that the vaccines are simply ineffective for immunocompromised individuals. The CDC and multiple manufacturers of the vaccines have stated that immunocompromised individuals might need up to 2 additional boosters to see true efficacy of the vaccines, meaning that these individuals not only see the negative aspects of the vaccine and still risk the complications. This debate is not about whether vaccines are good or bad. It's not about conspiracy theories against the vaccine. This debate is about the dangers that a mandate poses towards communities and the individuals who are historically and systematically targeted by a public health operation. You as a judge have an obligation as someone in an educational space to reject proximal violence and utilitarian framing as continuously used to justify violence against disenfranchised groups and individuals. You vote in the direction that takes the most ethical actions possible and undertakes historical narratives in a constructive and progressive way that progresses this space of pedagogy and learning. We are open to answer any questions and will provide all sources upon request. Thank you.
All right. Rachel, you can stay up there. It's time for our first crossfire involving the first 2 speakers.
Does the mandate allot exemptions or religious exemptions?
Yes, our mandate would allow religious exemptions with pastoral note and verification so that the religious exemption isn't void and there isn't loopholes so that people can, lie about it.
So how would they go about proving that they are religiously exempt?
Like I just said, that the note from a pastor or a religious group would be sufficient enough, just as verification. So when you talk about how other racial communities don't have the medical help that they do, what would you say if vaccines were offered by the school? Would that still apply? That there would be a minority that's not able to get the vaccine?
I think that it would still imply, because it'd be available to those who would be at the university, and so these groups may not have access to even be able to come to the university and be administered the COVID-19 vaccination.
Okay.
What happens if people don't follow the mandate?
There are other alternatives like online schooling if the mandate isn't followed and you don't want the vaccine. There's always other alternatives.
Okay. Yeah. What does the judge vote on today? Public health.
Actually, that's time. Thanks, everybody. Our second affirmative speaker.
Am I able to go without the mic?
Sorry?
Am I able to go without the mic?
You can, although I'm having trouble even hearing you for that, so just think of, yeah. Oh yeah, you can move it.
I'm Nathan Bookwell, representing the affirmative. So firstly, I'd like to start with a response line opposition and saying that I find it interesting that you're pointing out that utilitarian ethics can't outweigh public economy with reference to Black and Indigenous people of color, concerning that Black and Indigenous people of color are most at risk, or not most at risk, but at heightened risk of COVID-19 and its symptoms as a result of the healthcare system that you're discussing. The lack of access to medical care that threatens Black and Indigenous people of color is incredibly dangerous, considering that right now the American Nursing Association has declared a national... Part of the American Nursing Association, representing the interests of the nation's 4.2 million nurses, they're urging the Department of Health and Human Services to declare the current and unsustainable nursing staffing shortage facing our country a national crisis. And they specifically cite in their policy solutions the education of the nation on the importance of the COVID-19 vaccine to provide resources for widespread administration of the COVID-19 vaccine and subsequent boosters. The nursing staffing shortage and other issues concerning lack of access to medical care are especially dangerous to Black and Indigenous people of color for the same reasons that the current economic system is dangerous to them. Lack of access to medical care for anyone is especially dangerous, but considering that they already have decreased access to medical care is even worse for them. So by providing COVID-19 vaccine mandates, increasing the rate of inoculation, or to slow the spread of the virus, which would in turn benefit marginalized communities even more by preventing them from coming in contact with an even more dangerous disease. I'd also like to mention, as part of that, the CDC, as of November 17th, 2021, stated that about 15% of American COVID-19 deaths are attributed to the nation's Black population, while only 12.2% of them are actually forming the entire U.S. population according to the 2020 census, meaning that disproportionately Black people are dying as a result of COVID-19 vaccine, or as a lack of COVID-19 vaccine. I also like to point out that according to the NCSL, college and university campuses are at higher risk for outbreaks and communicable diseases due to students attending classes or living in close quarters, increasing geographically diverse student populations, and higher prevalence of certain diseases among younger populations. These students not only can hurt their own college campuses that they were on by contracting and spreading disease, but also the communities that they live in and return to between semesters or even occasional weekends. That includes those marginalized communities that I was discussing previously. I'd also like to point out that college students, even those that have college students have an inherent level of privilege, and as evidenced by their enrollment in higher education, an infamously expensive endeavor. And this level of privilege is at an altitude where simple preventive care like inoculations are no longer out of reach. And I'd also like to further add that many, if not most, public universities require vaccinations such as those against meningitis. There is no additional barrier provided by the COVID-19 vaccination mandates that is not already present in the meningitis vaccine mandates. Also, with your reference to immunocompromised people being at higher risk of complications from the COVID-19 vaccine, I'd like to mention that according to Harvard Medical School, as of November 16th, when responding to the question, are there any groups who should not get the mRNA COVID-19 vaccine, Harvard Medical School writes, there are only a few groups of people who should not get the mRNA vaccine. They include people who are allergic to any components of the mRNA vaccine, which includes polyethylene glycol, PPG, and polysorbate, or have an allergic reaction within the first 30 minutes after receiving the first dose of an mRNA vaccine.
That's time.
Vaccine.
All right. And now it's time for our next negative speaker. I'm going to close this door.
My name is Gabby Lett. I'm going to be the second affirmative speaker today. I'm triple vaccinated, so I'm going to put my mask down because we talk fast at some point. That's a joke. I'm not going to. I'm sorry. Cool. Before I actually start my time, I want to start with a thank you to everyone in the round for showing up and for a productive discussion. I really appreciate that as a debater and as a scholar in communication studies and just in general. For a brief off-time roadmap, I'm going to offer a framing of the round, and then we're going to go down the 1AC. I'll signpost as I go along. Cool. Is anyone not ready? Starting off, I'm going to frame the round for you today in a few ways, the first of which is framing the round as a pedagogical discussion. This means how we understand knowledge and how we formulate knowledge. This is going to be how you are framing your ballot today specifically, because this isn't a debate for a competition or for a trophy. This is a debate in a classroom, on a university, and with university policies and centering those academic discussions. So you are going to be voting for the team that best prioritizes like pedagogy and how we discuss knowledge production. But let's go ahead and look onto the affirmative case. The first thing that they highlight is a 1790 gene and cancer study. This literally ties to contention 1, right? This specific studies and the studies that were done in this time were literally done on slave and enslaved bodies that they would dig up from these graves and perform studies like on these people, right? Like the discussions that we have and the understandings that we have of the medical field are specifically tied inextricably to systemic racism. I'll get onto that later. The second thing that they talk about is the importance of colleges returning to normal. The first thing that I want to highlight is that KFF and PBS specifically say that the return to normalcy in terms of like in-person classes and in-person discussions can also be problematic, specifically from the decrease of stress that college students have faced to the increased stress, right? We are all back to normal, right? And now we have places to be and things that we have to do that we were not prepared to do in person. If there is no infrastructure to help these college students get from completely online to in person, then forcing these students, this is the second point, right? They say that the problem, or like the punishment for not following the mandate is that they'll go to online learning again, right? If there's no infrastructure to get these college students from in person, or from online to back to in person, then that's problematic for their mental health. But let's also look onto the fact that they highlight that the meningitis vaccine has been required first. The thing that we want to look to is that this vaccination has existed for literal years and years and years. But second, there are still exceptions for the meningitis vaccination. There are still multiple exceptions that they make for this vaccination requirement, and colleges like understand that those things exist. We're also going to look to the fact that they highlight that the COVID side effects, or the side effects for the COVID vaccinations, are low. Cross-apply their cross-answer. Really, this is the thing that I want to highlight specifically here. Oh, this isn't tied to the argument. I don't know why I flipped it there. In their cross-answer in Crossfire, they specifically highlight on terms of like religious exemptions. They say, quote, pastors and such, and those religious leaders. This is something that I really want to cross-apply in terms of the 1AC to the first contention on the 1NC, that the religious exemptions that they allot are specifically tied inextricably to Anglo religions, right, which are inherently like white religions, right, which literally proves like the institutional racism claim that we highlight in contention 1, but I'll get onto that later again. They say college vaccination rates are low. Psych Today specifically explains this. Actually, it's a really interesting article in general, but they specifically highlight that college students have naivety and egocentrism, which are ways that they specifically react to vaccine mandates or cause to get vaccinated in the first place, right? This doesn't get around the vaccine mandate, right? Egocentrism and like naivety, if we want to call it, doesn't just disappear, right? Everyone's heard of lockdown browser. It's not very locked down, is it? Right? College students find a way around it. So yeah, and that's specifically also tied to their religious exemptions point. They're continuously going to infiltrate and find ways to get around the specific mandate. Just because it exists doesn't mean that 20-year-olds are magically going to follow a vaccine requirement. They're all going to go to online learning, which is problematic for their mental health, for their learning, and for the institution itself, or they're just going to find ways around it with the religious exemption. There is no advocacy with this, which is problematic when we look to Riley 2021, which was actually published today, and Remain 21, which are specifically highlighting the fact that COVID right now is worsening. They both see this in two ways, right? So first of which is that the breakthrough cases that were like super rare are happening all the time, right? Because the vaccines aren't effective because of the continuous like growth in the specific strains. Sorry, I forgot the word strains. The second thing, right, is that Remain specifically highlights that by spring, there is going to be a strain that is entirely vaccine resistant, right? Pfizer, Moderna, J&J, none of them are going to be effective to this specific strain that all of these immunologists are highlighting will exist by spring alone. Another thing that is problematic with the affirmative case is going to look to Block 21, which specifically highlights the fact that COVID vaccine mandates are sexist in nature. They do not allocate specific exemptions for pregnant people and people who are pregnant, which is problematic because that vaccine, the vaccine resistancy, or like how the body reacts to that, can be proven really problematic in terms of that pregnancy and can serve really dangerous, not just for the impregnated person, but also the fetus itself. The last thing we want to highlight on the affirmative case is the class of 99 specifically highlights that it is dangerous to implement vaccine mandates without informational sessions, right? We can say get vaccinated, get vaccinated, get vaccinated, or you're going online, but if there is no informational session, if there's no accessibility in healthcare, if there are not these fundamental infrastructural things that are necessary, then the vaccine mandate is not only ineffective, but problematic in nature.
All right. And now it's time for our second Crossfire.
For the first question. Oh, I'm so sorry. It's 2 minutes. You can have the first question.
So first thing I'd like to ask you, do you understand by slowing the rate of spread of COVID-19, that the possibility of COVID mutating into different strains and the possibility of breakthrough cases intrinsically decreases?
Yeah, so what's really interesting about that specifically is that the Riley evidence as well as the Romaine evidence highlight that the strains that are existing specifically in Europe or even in the United States in urban areas that are highly and like facing highly vaccinated rates, right? These people are vaccinated, it is just vaccine resistant. That's something that Romaine talks on a lot. You can actually, I'll send you that article. Yeah, so my first question is if we can recognize that there are heightened risks in terms of Black and Indigenous populations, that there are heightened risks and that there's inaccessibility to healthcare, where do these people get the vaccines from?
Well, some of the college students from the college or the surrounding communities with general medical code and with the access to medical care than their home communities.
Okay, great.
I have another question. So considering that there are significant historical ramifications for the medical system, isn't it even more important then that Black people and other indigenous people now benefit from all of those horrible things that happened more now than ever, considering that research can now save their lives?
Yeah, so specifically the evidence functions in two ways. We're going to talk about intention, one for contextualization, so you can reach to those three articles, right? So first and foremost, settler futurity is one of the fundamental things in this round, right? The way that we view knowledge and the way that we understand this round is like in combating the way that we are going to have control over Native and Black populations, right? So specifically the fact that we are like, yeah, like we like exploited your bodies and your people for like centuries of years, but now you can get a vaccine, right? That's problematic, right? Especially whenever you mandate that they get this vaccine that is built fundamentally off of the study of their bodies or else, right? That punishment is really problematic. But the second thing is specifically that there is like hesitancy within the Black community and specifically within the Indigenous community. Oh, is it time?
It is.
Yeah. Hesitancy that exists, which is problematic because they don't want to get this vaccine because it is historically to their detriment.
All right, great job. Yes, it's a very short crossfire. It is a very, very short crossfire. It's time for our third speaker from the affirmative side.
I'm going to be running a little bit of a thread.
Okay,
That's all right.
I can do that.
I'll start my timer.
Yep. Just to fill our audience members, each side can use some preparation time during the debate. That's 1 minute used, 1 minute left.
And I'll cease here then.
Okay.
Hi, just to introduce myself really fast. My name is Ellery Yates. I'm the third speaker for the affirmative side. As like a super brief off-time roadmap, I'm just going to be kind of going straight down the flow. I'll start off on the aff side and then move to the neg. With that, is anybody not ready? Opponents, are you set? Judge, are you set? Awesome. Actually, I lied. I'm going to be starting on the next side and then moving to the outside.
Okay. All right.
Okay, so if anybody's not ready, I'll begin. On their first contention, they give us a lot of information about how this hurts marginalized communities. We have a couple of responses. The first of which is that we do not deny that we have problems in our healthcare systems, especially surrounding structural racism. However, it would be worse for marginalized communities if we allow this pandemic to run rampant. Because of staffing shortages and the national crisis, the education of the nation is most important, especially right now. As we read to you in our last speech, a disproportionate amount of Black people are dying because of COVID-19. Vaccine mandates solve back for this. If we're allowed to reach the level of herd immunity that we are required to, we won't be seeing as many people dying, like, period. We'll be able to get rid of COVID entirely, which solves back for the structural racism. We understand, yes, it's bad. However, in this case, we have to prioritize the public health because it doesn't matter. Structural racism won't matter if everyone is dead. Moving on, the second thing that they talk about is this idea of like religious exemptions. or just exemptions, like, period. They say that urban areas have seen an increase in non-medical exemptions. Yes, this is an issue and a loophole. However, we can't just allow that, like, you have to provide proof under most, like, examples of whether you have, like, a religious exemption or not. We're not just letting people just kind of come in and say, like, oh, hey guys, guess what, I have this exemption. No, you have to provide proof to some degree that you are a part of that religion that allows the religious exemptions, which kind of falls back to this loophole. Moving on to the last thing that they talk about this autoimmune deficiency. Saying that like 63% of people are harmed. We have medical exemptions as well. It's not just religious exemptions. Medical exemptions exist as well. This isn't like a loophole that you need to be able to weigh in today's debate round. It doesn't actually have any bearing on the flow because people can get exempt from this from vaccines. For medical reasons. So you can just take this argument off the flow. Kind of moving back to the AF side, I want to talk about, again, we've explained that like the 1790 study that we talk about, yes, it was done on slaves. However, we have this information now. We understand, again, structural violence in terms of racism doesn't matter in today's debate round because we have to prioritize public health. They also mentioned this, like college students will find a way around it, but AF actually has a risk of solvency. NEG provides no risk of solvency. We're actually providing a risk of solvency on how we can solve back for COVID-19 in general. You have to flow to the side that actually provides something that means that we could actually fix something instead of just sitting with the status quo, which clearly has not been working as we're seeing COVID-19 get worse right now. Again, we have reached that herd immunity, we need herd immunity, and age groups between 18 and 24 have much lower vaccination rates at 34% being fully vaccinated. If we're able to increase this, it helps solve back a couple of different things. The first of which is harm on college campuses. However, college campuses historically have been able to solve back for COVID really quickly by moving to things online. But the surrounding communities that are hurt by this, because college students don't solely exist on college campuses, we also exist in surrounding communities. And those surrounding communities cannot solve back as fast as college campuses can. Moving on, they talk about religious exemptions create a loophole so people can just show up on our case. That's what they talk about. And again, reference on their side of the flow. The response that I made saying that you have to provide proof. You can't just say oh, I'm a part of this religion. Just kind of moving back to the framing, they talk about this pedagogical discussion. Yes, we understand that. However, you also have to understand that public health ethics involves, when talking about public health specifically, it involves normative consequential ethics, i.e. a utilitarian framework. We have to be able to prioritize the public good because public good takes precedence over all. Again, I want to reiterate that nothing in this debate round matters if everyone is dead. If we continue to allow the pandemic to get worse and worse and worse and worse and worse, as we have been in the status quo, which is what the neg side is arguing for, we won't actually solve anything. AF actually provides a path to solving back for people dying by getting to that herd immunity point. The last thing that I want to bring up is they talk about pregnant women needing to get the vaccine. I'm reading new evidence on this because they brought it up in their last speech. The Journal of Clinical Investigation in 2021 says that the CDC says that such as the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists and the Society for Maternal Fetal Medicine recommend that COVID-19 vaccines not be withheld from pregnant or lactating women. To date, none of the approved COVID-19 vaccines have been tested for safety, immunogenicity, or efficacy in pregnant women or their effects, but this will eliminate any concerns with the vaccine in pregnant women, and the college suggested it instead. Although I believe that should it be a personal decision, so does the CDC, but they do suggest that pregnant women actually receive this vaccine. And for all of the reasons stated today, I urge an AF ballot.
All right. Thank you. Our third negative speaker. Okay. 1 minute used, 1 minute left.
Thank you.
15 seconds.
How much?
15.
Excuse me.
All right. All right, we'll continue with our third negative speaker.
Okay, is everyone ready? Alrighty. Okay, my name is Jacqueline Hubble, and I'll be doing the third speech for the negative side. And I did just want to offer a trigger warning, and we apologize for not doing that earlier because we do have mentions of racial violence and misogyny. And so first, I am framing this round again in a decolonial pedagogy discussion by centering a combating of settler colonialism and historical racism. The affirmative drops this framing completely, so you should sign your ballot negative now. So you said that students have a choice of college to go to if they're requiring vaccine mandates, or if the college they wanted to go to is requiring a vaccine mandate, but they do not want to get vaccinated. But not all students have the freedom of going to whichever college they would like. This would include TCUs, or for example, or those that do not have the financial freedom to attend which college they would like, but would also like to receive a higher education. There's still a possibility to obtain a large amount of doctoral or religious exemptions from those that may not be qualified to receive them. In relation to institutional racism, TCU stands for tribal colleges and universities. Anything that has the chance to create a settler futurity for them is rejected. Many of these communities and colleges do not have access to these vaccines. And Black women have also been sterilized and tested on in the past. And this goes back to the Tuskegee experiments that have happened. And they're also scared of just receiving vaccines, and we should not force those who hold the spirit to mandate a vaccine on them. There has been a constant history of institutions testing on Black individuals. And you also said that all colleges have vaccines and it's not applicable to them. But these students come from these communities, and the colleges are in these areas that do not have access to vaccines. And we can't guarantee that every college has access to these vaccines, or they may be unaware of the access to them, so they're unable to receive them. And regarding utilitarian ethics, about Black and Indigenous people that do not get the vaccine, but you said that they're most at risk for getting the virus. You said that the lack of access to those with people of color is dangerous, and the lack of access to those providing COVID-19 will prevent them to the lack of access of providing the COVID-19 vaccine will I'm just gonna skip that part. CDC stated that you said that the CDC stated that 15% of COVID-19 deaths are attributed to Black individuals, and then 14% of Americans 14% of COVID-19 deaths are from Americans in total are dying to COVID. And this is disproportionate because of their lack of access in these communities. And then also you guys keep focusing on the public health, but our argument is centered around how white individuals do receive more of a acceptance from getting an exemption from the vaccine, and also conceding that this concedes from the first contention, and public health and utilitarianism must be rejected in pedagogy discussions. And then regarding religious exemptions, you said that a note from a pastor allows for a religious exemption, urban areas have seen an increase in religious exemptions, and this decreases the efficacy of the vaccines. This voids the religious exemptions because then the vaccines and the creation of herd immunity will not occur. The non-medical exemptions do not require a doctor's. The non-medical exemptions do not require a doctor's note, and anyone can just state that they are something like a certain religion to become exempt, and we can't question that. This is known to be accepted, but when a black individual refuses vaccination due to their history of experiments, then it's suddenly not accepted. This would be an abuse of power and should apply to all races if it is mandated, but it's not. And for our question of freedom versus safety, the safety is only guaranteed for white individuals. And towards religious exemption, people are able to bypass any exemption and find a way to receive an exemption and declare that they're religious, even if they're not. As stated before, people can suddenly declare that they're religious to avoid vaccination. And religious exemptions also profit from new members, so it gives them an incentive to become exempt. And also, people who are vaccinated are still able to get the virus and spread it. It does not make you 100% immune. As variants continue to form because it is impossible for everyone to become vaccinated. Also, according to the CDC, many of those with immunodeficiency have prone to have a breakthrough infection of the virus. And also based on the Boston University studies, there are also students that begin classes without a certificate of immunization against meningitis disease. And so this is stating back to you saying that many colleges. Oh, okay.
Yep. All right, very nice. Well, ladies and gentlemen, you are in for a treat as it is time for our grand crossfire. Who's going to start us off?
Richard, you have to answer this question.
Okay, I guess that leaves it to me. So I kind of want to talk about this, like, religious exemption point, because I don't fully understand the religious exemption point that you're making, kind of on your side of the flow and on ours, saying that, like, urban areas have seen an increase in non-medical exemptions, and, like, why does this matter in today's debate round?
Yeah, that's a good question. So this religious exemption argument functions two ways, right? So the first of which is through that evidence. The increase in urban areas is problematic because it means that people are just using these exemptions willy-nilly, right? They specifically highlight that they didn't mandate that a doctor's note, a priest's note, they didn't mandate these exemption forms required proof. They just said, we have a religious exemption, and that was it, right? That's problematic because it gets rid of the mandate effectively, because suddenly everyone's like a Scientologist or whatever, right?
Okay, so you said this functions in two ways.
But the second thing is specifically that the religions that historically and traditionally use this religious exemption are Anglo religions, which means white-centric and white historical religions, right? Which proves the first contention on settler colonialism.
Okay, perfect. That answers my question. Do you have a question?
Yeah, for sure. I do have a question. Do you know everything you're allergic to?
No, I don't.
Thanks so much. Do you have a question?
Did you know that's the entire reason why you're monitored for the last 30 minutes after receiving the first COVID vaccine?
For sure.
So that if you are allergic to something,
yeah,
you know
so that's
about it
actually,
immediately afterwards.
yeah, that's actually a great conversation to be had with the second, with the Romaine and Riley evidence, which, I think it was Mueller 21, that specifically highlight that not everyone knows that they have these allergic reactions or that they are immunocompromised. And those reactions don't just happen in the first 15 minutes, by the way, 15 minutes after post-vaccinations, but specifically can happen like any time after that vaccination. The next question we had specifically was about public health. So we mentioned in contention one that public health historically is used to...
It's 3 minutes, actually.
3 minutes?
Yeah, the grand crossfire is 3 minutes.
We mentioned that specifically public health is how used to historically like exclude and marginalize indigenous and black communities. How does that change? Like how has public health historically been used to justify the violence against Native and black individuals? Does the definition of public health or the motive behind public health suddenly change after centuries of oppression and exploitation? Or what does public health look like in this round?
So what we're saying is not necessarily, like, we're not denying that, yes, like, we have an issue with structural violence, especially in our healthcare, like, systems. However, what we're saying is that in this particular instance, especially because black and indigenous communities are being specifically harmed by COVID, in the like status quo that these mandates will actually we have to prioritize public health in this situation, because by like prioritizing it, we're solving back for more than just like this theoretical thing. We're actually solving back for like lives.
Sure. So,
And I think that's time.
okay.
Sorry for the
That's all right,
confusion.
jumping on my
The
practice.
first crossfires are 2 minutes and the grand crossfire is 3 minutes. Apologies for any confusion on that. So it's time for our final focus from the affirmative. Unless you wanted to use some prep time. Yeah, I got it. 57 seconds left.
Perfect.
Uh-huh.
Okay, we'll see prep here.
All right.
My name is Maddie Carlos, and I'll be the fourth speaker for the affirmative. So, in regards to what the negative side said, they present all these issues about how vaccine mandates are not effective, whether it's talking about breakthrough cases or about how people use religious exemptions to skirt them. But they don't really have any risk of solvency. They don't provide any other solutions. And a vaccine mandate is at least one way that we can enforce some amount of people to get a vaccine. It's also important to recognize that the main purpose of a vaccine mandate is to reach herd immunity. And so even if people choose not to get the vaccine or try to skirt around it, if you can get at least 70%, that means it is effective, regardless of 5% of people getting religious exemptions. Even if those 5% of people aren't actually religiously exempt, it still makes the vaccine mandate effective. It's also important to point out that in no way does the affirmative want to discount the struggles of minorities that they've experienced in public health or the field of medicine. It's extremely important that we recognize those, but it's also important to note that their struggles do not discount the effectiveness of the vaccine. These studies with this vaccine, and particularly with the COVID vaccine, have been ethical. And while previous vaccines haven't always been ethical with COVID, the research done behind it has been done in an ethical way and has been very transparent as well with the research, since it's been done through the government. And so you can't really discount the effectiveness of this particular vaccine, and that's what this issue is about, is this vaccine on public college campuses. And so it's also important to remember that public college is not a right. While people do have a right to attempt to attend public colleges also have a right to turn students down, and they do on a yearly basis for a variety of reasons. People oftentimes do not meet the qualifications to attend a place of higher education, and if you're not willing to comply with mandates, whether that be a certain SAT score or graduating from high school with a GED or getting a vaccine, they are well within their right to turn you down. Additionally, most colleges that have vaccine mandates, they wouldn't even turn you down if you're not vaccinated. There's still other options offered for education, and at the end of the day, if your priority is education, if your priority is going to college and then you don't want to get vaccinated, then you can still have an online education, and that's just as well. Public college does not guarantee you the right to the college experience either. There's no guaranteed right to that. That is a privilege that you can receive if you comply with the mandate. And so that's a really important part to remember. And then in summarizing sort of our arguments, the main things that we have are that vaccine mandates are perfectly legal, and they have been for many years within a public college standpoint. Vaccine mandates are extremely effective at reaching herd immunity in the sense that they have been enacted many times throughout history, and after a set period of time, herd immunity is almost always reached. It's also important to know that when they discuss the breakthrough infections or the mutants, just because there are mutant viruses doesn't mean that the current COVID viruses that the vaccine does protect against will go away. So by saying that it makes the vaccine completely ineffective, that's not even true. If we would have no vaccine, then think of even more cases that we would have than now, just with the breakthrough cases or with the variants. And then again, it's about reaching herd immunity, which vaccine mandates have been proven to do. It's also important to remember that vaccine mandates have been considered from a legal standpoint to be ethical, despite the issues surrounding bodily autonomy, in the sense that, again, college is a choice. You're not mandated to go to college. So at the end of the day, you're not even forced to get the vaccine. It's more of you have to get the vaccine in order to enjoy the college experience. And then again, it's also herd immunity is the most effective way to slow the spread. That's why vaccine mandates are the most effective way to prevent the spread of COVID, in the sense that herd immunity protects the vast majority of individuals, and it allows things to return to normal sooner. Which, if you want the normal public college experience, that is the most important thing, is reaching herd immunity. And then again, mandates do not mean that people are being forced to get the shot. Not only do you not have to go to college, but there are religious exemptions, there are medical exemptions, and in some states even, there are also philosophical exemptions. So it's also important to remember that for example, Texas is one of the states that there are philosophical exemptions. So there are many ways that a person could be exempt, and they are all verifiable as well, in the sense that you do have to provide proof that you genuinely follow them. But even in the off chance that people believe that you could be skirting it and lying, there's still not a high enough percentage of people to negate the efficacy of a vaccine mandate. So.
All right. Very nice. We have 2 seconds of preparation time left. Oh, there it goes. All right. All right. Our our negative final focus speaker.
Hello, my name is Kayla Ramirez. I'll be the last speaker for the negative side. I will be doing the summary. All right. So I will be voting negative in today's debate for a few reasons. First, on the framework level, we highlight in the very first speech that pedagogical discussions are the most important things in this space, as we are in college class and centered around learning. The affirmative mentions public health framing, but consistently ignores our critique of the use of they say we will all die, and we will save lives, but again ignore how this was always used to justify violence against natives. Plus, ignore the conceded evidence that states the diseases will always mutate and become vaccine resistant. Next, our first contention is the historical exclusion in healthcare services. The history of medicine and healthcare in the USA is marked by racial injustice and myriad forms of violence, unequal access to healthcare, and the segregations of medical facilities and the exclusion of African Americans from medical education are some of the most obvious examples. This is very repetitive history of involuntary medical experimentation with Black Americans. This history has created justified hesitancy towards the vaccine, and madding these people just suck it up and get vaccinated is problematic. Next, let's discuss the second contention of religious exemptions. This argument functions 2 ways again. First, they recognize that the loosey-goosey effect of these exemptions allow people to exploit the system, but second, they ignore their use and the norm use of certain Anglo religions and how it relates to contention 1. On solvency, again, we highlight we don't have to solve public health or lives, but combat the affirmative use of settler fertility within healthcare institutional. Finally, their entire case is based in public health, but ignore 2 things. One, again, it's based in utilitarian framing and saving the most lives, but disregards people who have righteous hesitancy to the vaccine. And 2, again, ignore and don't interact with our framing of the round. Okay. Third, the CDC 50% COVID they said 50% of the black population had deaths, but black people, they said black people are dying and they understand that it's bad. They said structural racism won't matter if everyone is dead, but it does matter because it is here today. And my bad. We cannot completely ignore structural racism because history, exploration, marginalization, and disempowerment are embedded in some personal decisions of non-participation. Getting the vaccine won't erase the centuries of mistrust. There were incidents, my bad. Oh, sorry. On the other hand, the affirmative and resolution also demand the mandate for public health and good so that they can still use these people for their labor, and which also proves the act of cellular colonization true. And that's all I have today.
All right. Would you join me in thanking the work of our debaters in this round? So we have a couple of minutes left. Do we have